Ask not what America will do for you.
Out of it will come a better life for all mankind.
Robert F. Kennedy, United States Senator, campaigning for president.
Is on a perilous course, and because I have such strong feelings.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Two men determined to change the course of history. Two men who captured the heart and soul of America. Two brothers felled by the bullets of assassins.
President Kennedy has been shot.
Please stay back. We need a doctor here.
Senator Kennedy shot. I don't believe this. Senator Kennedy.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
We were told they were desperate acts of lone assassins. But were the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy linked? Not just to each other, but to the suspicious death of Marilyn Monroe and the mysterious disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Can we really believe all these events were coincidence? Or is it possible that the Kennedys died as a result of the same conspiracy? Welcome to the Kennedy Assassinations. Coincidence or conspiracy?
In a special live broadcast from Los Angeles, California, it's the Kennedy Assassinations with your host, Robert Conrad.
John F. Kennedy was gunned down in 1963. Robert Kennedy was shot and killed 5 years later. Hello, I'm Robert Conrad. On our last show, the JFK conspiracy, over 120,000 people called in. 99% demanded that the JFK files be opened, tired of the cover-up. On this show, we will open the door even wider to expose the truth. We will reveal a letter from Jack Ruby. You will see written evidence from one of the assassins, and you'll learn the link between Marilyn Monroe's death and the Kennedys. To help us in the studio is Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Jennifer Volappi.
Thank you, Robert. The question is, were the Kennedys gunned down by the same people for the same reason? To help us decide, our guests include Frank Regano, the man who admits to carrying the orders to kill JFK. Victor Marchetti, the CIA officer who tells us of a Mafia-CIA connection. Philip Melanson, with evidence that Sirhan did not act alone. Oliver Stone, the man who put the Kennedy assassination back into the limelight, and a brave person who has come forward to tell us what it was like to be married to an assassin. So, Robert, those are just some of the people that will be helping us in our investigation.
Throughout the program, we want to give you the opportunity to be heard on an important issue. Should there be a new investigation into the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, including the death of Marilyn Monroe?
If you believe there should be a new investigation into the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, including the death of Marilyn Monroe, call 1-900-400-6341. To vote no, call 1-900-400-6351. Randomly connected callers may ask questions of our panel. Each call is $1, and you must be 18 or older to call.
We want to hear from you. In fact, in the short time since our last show, the JFK conspiracy, we've heard from people who decided they could no longer keep silent. Tonight, they present never-before-seen evidence.
Next, the dangerous liaison, Marilyn, Jack, and Bobby, and how various elements hope to use this love affair to destroy the Kennedys.
Sponsored evidence regarding the death of JFK. On this program, we probe further. We will learn of the link between John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn. Publicly, she was America's reigning sex goddess, hounded by photographers, pressed for autographs, and adored by millions. Privately, she was John Kennedy's mistress. They met at a party in 1954 when both of them were relative newlyweds. John Kennedy to Jackie, and Marilyn to her second husband. Jack Kennedy attempted to keep the romance a secret. He was Catholic, married, and running for president. But even as president, the affair continued.
So help me God.
And Marilyn was about to become quite dangerous to his presidency. Meanwhile, he had actor Peter Lawford help him keep the secret. Lawford was married to Jack's sister and part of the Kennedy family. But all the time, the president's enemies attempted to learn about the affair and use it against him. Jack Kennedy finally saw the handwriting on the wall. It was time to cool his relationship with Marilyn. In 1962, Marilyn traveled to New York to wish the president happy birthday at Madison Square Garden.
Mr. President.
Some believe the president sent his brother, Robert Kennedy, to her dressing room to make sure she understood the affair was over.
I guess Jack got tired and decided he would have to be rid of her. So then he asked Bobby to take over and try and let her know that it had to end. I guess it was getting a little too hot after that song she did for his birthday. So Bobby took over, but unfortunately, Bobby fell in love with her and vice versa.
Bobby fell head over heels for Marilyn. And again, his brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, helped keep the secret for the Kennedy family.
No, I won't.
Yes, Marilyn did talk to me about Bobby and about Jack, and as a matter of fact, I was with both of them at one time or another.
But Marilyn was needy, unstable, demanding. And that was dangerous for Bobby and for the Kennedy family. And it was dangerous because enemies of the Kennedys were keeping close tabs on Marilyn's house. The attic was a maze of listening devices.
Marilyn's house was bugged. Several groups of people were more than casually interested in what was going on. Joining Jennifer are two experts on Marilyn and the Kennedys.
Thanks, Robert. With us now is John Davis, cousin to Jacqueline Kennedy and author of The Kennedys, Dynasty and Disaster, and Mafia Kingfish. Also joining us, James Spada, biographer of Peter Lawford, the man who kept the secrets, and Monroe, her life in pictures. Jim, let's start with you. Who exactly was bugging Marilyn's house?
Marilyn's house was bugged by elements of the Republican Party, by Marilyn herself, and by the Mafia.
Well, let's go right down the list there and you give me their motivations. The Republican Party, why?
Well, they wanted to have something to hold against JFK in the 1964 election. Marilyn wanted to have something to hold over Bobby's head because he was threatening to break off the relationship. And the Mafia was hoping to have something to blackmail the Kennedys with.
John, do you agree with that, that's why the organized crime was bugging Marilyn's house?
Yes, I do. I think they were going to use the information as ammunition against Attorney General Kennedy, who had mounted the largest war against organized crime in the history of the nation.
So we know from FBI wiretaps that JFK had some 32 affairs while he was in the White House. Why was Marilyn so special? Why her house?
She was the most visible. She would have, an affair with her would have created the greatest impression on the public.
Do you consider the Kennedys to have been good subjects for blackmail?
Not really. First of all, the Kennedys were extremely self-confident. They felt invulnerable. They felt invincible. And I don't think they would succumb to blackmail very readily.
So, Jim, you agree with that?
Yes, I think so.
So if members of organized crime really just wanted to blackmail the Kennedys with this information, since they knew about the affair, why not just go to the media with it? Why not take it to the press?
Well, you know, in 1962, there was a very different climate among the media. There was an old boy network. There was a gentleman's agreement that certain subjects were off limits. John F. Kennedy was a very popular president, and there were certain subjects that would have been too scandalous for major responsible newspapers to cover.
So it would never have gotten out, you believe, then?
No.
I see. So essentially what you both seem to be telling me is that members of organized crime could not get what they wanted out of the Kennedys by blackmailing them. So as we'll be hearing a little bit later on, they had to up the stakes. And we'll be talking to both of you gentlemen in just a little while. Thank you. Robert.
Did the dangerous liaisons the Kennedys had with Marilyn lead to her death? We'll find out next.
Coming up, the Mafia's hatred for the Kennedys, and how a deadly deal was made between the Mafia and the CIA to set up a team of assassins.
Marilyn making love to a Kennedy.
They were trying to get something they could blackmail Jack Kennedy with.
Marilyn Monroe was about to become a liability to the Kennedys. She was a skeleton in their closet, but she was minor compared to the other big skeleton, the Mafia.
Behind closed doors, the Kennedys had ties to organized crime. Some believe it began during Prohibition when Joseph Kennedy had dealings with bootleggers like Al Capone. In 1960, Joseph Kennedy desperately wanted his son elected president. He went to everyone he knew for help, including Sam Giancana, who had inherited Al Capone's criminal empire in Chicago.
There is substantial evidence to believe that organized crime did, in fact, play a significant role in the president's election. Apparently, substantial mob money was filtered into the campaign from mob figures through Joseph Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy and Mafia boss Sam Giancana struck a bargain. Organized crime would get votes and dollars for the Kennedys.
But keep your boy Bobby on a tight leash, Tabish.
It is fair to say that but for organized crime's influence, it is unlikely that the president would have been elected.
This prompted Giancana to boast, "I want to run the country." One of the reasons organized crime supported Kennedy so strongly was the situation in Cuba. For decades, the mob had run gambling and prostitution in Cuba. Havana was the gambling capital of the world. But the mob had been thrown out in 1959 when Fidel Castro came to power. As president, Kennedy promised to get rid of Castro and throw the communists out of Cuba.
It is clear that the forces of communism are not to be underestimated in Cuba or anywhere else in the world.
The mob expected preferential treatment from the Kennedys. Instead, they got only grief from Jack's brother Bobby. Put simply, Robert Kennedy hated the mob.
And this was in cash also? That's right. And no collateral, no note? That's right. And no interest paid? That's right. Has it been paid back? No, it has not.
The mob bosses had assumed that Bobby would let up once the brother was elected. But instead, as Attorney General, Robert Kennedy's personal goal was to destroy organized crime in America.
Hey, what's going on? FBI, Sam. What, do I look stupid? I know you're the FBI. You know who I am? I'm Sam Giancana.
Everyone knows who you are, Sam. Just another crook.
Hey, screw you, your boss, and your boss's boss, too.
Who's that, Sam?
Giancana and the other mob bosses felt they had been double-crossed, and the Mafia was not an organization that liked to turn the other cheek.
Tell your boss Bobby Kennedy's dead. You hear me?
The Kennedy connection to the Mafia was a well-guarded secret. Robert Kennedy's hatred for the mob was not. Joining Jennifer and John Davis, now journalist and author of 4 books on organized crime, Dan Moldea.
Robert, we have just heard that members of organized crime played a major role in electing Jack Kennedy as president. And John, I'd like to start with you. What proof of that do we actually have?
We have some proof. In December 1961, an FBI bug picked up a conversation between Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosselli that indicated that Joseph P. Kennedy had donated a sum of money to Giancana through Frank Sinatra to buy votes in the West Virginia primary. This is the only really concrete evidence we have. It's a discussion between Giancana and Rosselli about Joseph P. Kennedy's donation to buy votes in the West Virginia primary.
But it's also important to point out that the rest of the wiretap, as it reads in December of 1961 after the election, says, Giancana says to Rosselli, 1 minute Sinatra says he talked to Robert, and the next minute he says he hasn't talked to him. So he never talked to him. Why lie to me? I haven't got that coming. And Rosselli responds, if he can't deliver, I want him to tell me, John, the load is too heavy. John and Bob Kennedy were not part of any deal with the Mafia.
So you both feel confident that even if Joe Kennedy did make this deal with Giancana, that John and Bobby did not know about it?
It was a unilateral affair between Joe Kennedy and Giancana, and the 2 sons knew nothing about it.
We do know that Bobby later found out because Hoover told him, right?
Later he was told by Hoover in 1962.
Right. And what happened?
He went into a rage. He was terribly upset, and he called up his father to find out if it was true. We don't know the details of that conversation, but we know that 4 days later, Joe Kennedy came down with a stroke.
So despite this new information Bobby now has, he continues to wage basically the biggest war ever on organized crime. Is this Bobby's sense of moral justice coming into play? Is that what it is?
It's his sense of moral justice, his missionary zeal, along with pure Kennedy arrogance.
Well, Bobby Kennedy was the greatest crime fighter this country has ever had. He began with as chief counsel of the Senate Rackets Committee in 1957. It extended until 1960. The month before the West Virginia primary, Bobby Kennedy identified Sam Giancana as public enemy #1. He wasn't going to make a deal with him.
And while we're on the topic of Bobby Kennedy's targets, we know Sam Giancana. We also know Jimmy Hoffa. Who else was Bobby primarily
The
interested
principal
in?
targets in Bobby Kennedy's war against organized crime were Jimmy Hoffa, Santos Trafficante, the Mafia boss of Florida, and Carlos Marcello. All three had conversations with associates indicating that they were planning to kill John Kennedy in September of 1962. John wrote a fine book about Carlos Marcello. He could probably best explain him.
His significance to this
Well,
whole plot?
Marcello ran an enormous criminal empire that embraced Texas. Dallas, for example, was part of it. New Orleans, Mississippi. And Bobby Kennedy was determined to destroy this empire.
Also, it's important to note, too, that they were very heavily involved in Cuba as well.
So these are people basically that stood to be hurt the most by Castro's
Marcello
power.
had been thrown out of Cuba also.
Right.
But the thing that enraged Bobby Kennedy was that a deportation order had been issued against him, which Marcello had defied, and so Bobby decided to deport him in an arguably illegal way, to kidnap him off the streets of New Orleans and dump him in Guatemala.
Yeah, basically just picked him up and left him off there.
And it was after that that Marcello threatened to kill Kennedy.
Okay, I want to make the point again that these are people that stood to be hurt a great deal by Castro's power and wanted back in. And of course, getting Castro out of Cuba was one of John Kennedy's major campaign promises, as we all know. And as we're about to hear, it is a promise that he backed off on. Robert.
To have the Mafia as your enemy is a frightening concept. Having the CIA as your enemy is scary as well. Now, imagine these two groups working together. Now, that isn't fiction, it's fact. Even before JFK became president, the CIA and the Mafia had joined forces.
The CIA helped Castro gain power, but he threw the agency out when he became a communist. In 1959, the CIA contacted the Mafia. They wanted to get rid of Fidel Castro. They wanted a permanent solution.
The mob and the CIA?
But Washington wasn't in the assassination business. The Mafia was.
All right.
The CIA actually entered into an effort to assassinate President Castro of Cuba, and they elicited the help of the Mafia, principally through a man named John Rosselli in Las Vegas, who then contacted his superior in Chicago, Sam Giancana, who then contacted Santos Trafficante, who had the connections in Cuba.
Joe will be our direct contact in Cuba.
Johnny tells me you want a gangland-style hit. You want Castro gunned down by one of our guys.
The agency does, that's right.
The agency? You mean the CIA?
Various methods were conceived of to kill Castro. Poisons, disease, exploding cigars. Even a team of gunmen, professional assassins.
This ultra-black operation would be set up as a subset, so that if, in fact, the assassination attempts against Castro were ever brought to light, it would appear that organized crime had been the ones wanting to do this, because, of course, they had their own independent motive to remove Castro from power.
The deal gave the CIA access to killers. It gave the Mafia secret government protection. It was an unholy alliance.
A team effort.
Members of organized crime and the CIA working together to kill a political leader. Well, joining us now is Victor Marchetti. He is the former executive assistant to the deputy director and the highest-ranking CIA official ever to come forward. Now, Victor, tell me, is this the only time the CIA and members of organized crime actually work together?
No, the CIA has a long history of of working with the underworld. It began in World War II. The forerunner of the CIA, the OSS, enlisted the aid of Lucky Luciano and the Mafia to protect the docks in New York City against sabotage and labor strikes, and also to help in the invasion of Sicily and southern Italy.
Did the Kennedy administration know that the CIA and members of organized crime were working together to assassinate Castro?
Absolutely. In fact, the Kennedy administration, largely through Bobby, was pushing hard on this issue.
Victor, I have great respect for you and for your work, but I don't believe that John and Bob Kennedy were involved in the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. We're talking about murder here, and the Church Committee in its investigation didn't have a single source from the CIA or otherwise who indicated that JFK and RFK were involved in the CIA Mafia plots to assassinate Fidel Castro.
The agency witnesses at the Church Committee were responsible for protecting the agency as well as the office of the president and the system that provides for the president to be able to use the agency as its own secret tool. But Lyndon Johnson said that when he thought back about it and thought back about the assassination of Trujillo in the Dominican Republic and of Diem and his brother Nhu in Vietnam, that Jack Kennedy received divine retribution for these assassinations.
Well, still, when we're talking about when you're talking about the Kennedys working with the Mafia, you are talking about giving the Mafia enormous amounts of power. And again, I have to point: where is the fixed case? How do you explain the unprecedented war against organized crime by the Kennedys?
They were working with the CIA.
Who was working with the Mafia
as an asset.
So you're saying that the Kennedys were involved in plots to kill Castro, but they didn't realize that the Mafia was involved in these plots?
I think they knew the Mafia was being used as an asset.
Again, then it goes to the point of how could they have that kind of access, and how could they give the Mafia that kind of control, that kind of...
No, listen, the Kennedys were knowledgeable of those plots, but Bobby Kennedy was dead against having the Mafia involved in it. That's a matter of record.
But you do believe that he knew about it. Now, I want to move on.
Well, excuse me, just for a second. As a matter of record, there is no evidence that John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were involved in the CIA Mafia plots to kill
They were
Castro.
told about them in 1962. You know that.
They were told in the spring of 1962, and they immediately tried to do everything they could to stop them.
They didn't do anything to stop it. They encouraged this.
Richard Helms testified before the Church Committee.
Of course, that's what the CIA does. Our job is to lie, deceive, and to cover up for the president. That was his job, to protect the agency and the office of the presidency.
I still buy what people say under oath.
Now, history does tell us that...
You're very gullible.
Well, you're telling us that what they said under oath was irrelevant because that was their job to cover it up, correct? All right, history does tell us that the Bay of Pigs invasion was unsuccessful. Now, I want to know, did the CIA organized crime connection that you speak of die with the invasion back in 1961?
No. Well, in fact, that made things even hotter and made the Kennedys more determined to get rid of Castro.
What evidence do you have for that?
Well, it was known in the upper echelons of the agency. This was known and accepted. John Ronley wrote a very interesting book on the rise and fall of the CIA, in which many of the top agency officers confirmed this fact.
I want to just make a point here. Basically, then, when Kennedy makes the deal with Khrushchev to stay out of invading Cuba, members of organized crime are angry at that point. Do you all disagree very quickly or do you all agree, excuse me, very quickly on that point?
The Cuban exiles and the Mafia were very upset about the deal that was made with Khrushchev because they wanted the island back, and this meant that they would never get it back.
Okay, so let me stop you on that, and I just need to know from you, Victor, how did members of the CIA feel about that deal with Khrushchev?
Well, it was an accepted fact that we could not invade Cuba, but it was not a fact that we could not attempt to assassinate Castro or destabilize his government.
But what I'm getting at, Victor, is who is angry at the Kennedy administration for cutting this deal? Is it the CIA or is it rogue elements within the CIA?
Not the CIA as an institution, just certain individuals who were closely attached and emotionally involved in the Cuban ops.
So what you are saying then is rogue elements basically within the CIA could have been involved in a conspiracy against President Kennedy. And gentlemen, we're going to be speaking with you all a little bit later on in the program, but we'll be right back.
Meet the man who carried the actual orders to kill President Kennedy in a rare television appearance. But next, how the Mafia claims it murdered Marilyn to frame the Kennedys.
I need all. Told she committed suicide. But today there are many questions about her death. For one thing, we were never told about her affairs with the Kennedys. For another,
we never knew that the Mafia was bugging her house. Marilyn Monroe was quickly becoming a liability to Bobby Kennedy. Not only was her bedroom bugged by the Mafia, but she was bugging it herself. And she was keeping a diary.
And one day Bobby came in. I happened to be there on that occasion also. And he looked down and saw the diary on the table. And he said, "This is crazy. I don't like it." And he got very angry and he was turning red and getting really mad. And he threw it on the table. And he said, get rid of it right away. I don't want this around.
After that, Marilyn's relationship with RFK became strained.
I guess it was after the incident with the diary. He had turned the phone off. She couldn't reach him. He didn't tell her anything. He didn't explain to her. He just turned his phone off, and she could not reach him.
In desperation, Marilyn told Peter Lawford that she would make the affair public.
And when she told Peter that she was going to do this, I'm sure he told Bobby instantly.
On August 4th, 1962, Bobby rushed to Los Angeles. By then, Bobby had also found out that Marilyn was bugging her bedroom.
He said, "Where's the tape? We have to get it. You know, we have to protect the family. We'll do anything you want. Where is it?" And he was looking for it. Marilyn was screaming, and Bobby was screaming. And then finally, some people have said they heard what sounded like someone falling on the floor.
There was a second person with Robert Kennedy, probably a doctor, and experts believe he gave Marilyn a sedative to calm her. When Bobby left at 3 that afternoon, Marilyn was still alive. All this was recorded on tape, even the sounds of Bobby Kennedy leaving the house. According to the book Double Cross, this information was passed directly to Sam Giancana in Chicago. Giancana finally had a way to get back at the Kennedys. Although this is far from certain, Giancana's book says this is how Marilyn was murdered. While she was still groggy from the sedatives, the killers planted clues, including her diary, hoping to expose her secret love affairs with the Kennedys. Giancana wanted Marilyn to be found, knowing there'd be a sex scandal the likes of which this country has never seen. What happened, however, as before the police arrived, Peter Lawford arrived and cleaned everything up.
No, nobody called the police. The housekeeper called me first.
He did go over to the house, and he did try to remove everything he could that would link Marilyn Monroe to his brothers.
Yeah, she's dead. Or suicide, I guess.
He had to do that very quickly because the police hadn't arrived yet. He didn't want to be seen.
Yes, Marilyn's diary.
They had to be sure that no one could link Marilyn with the Kennedy brothers.
Joining us in the studio again is James Spada. And Jim, does this version of Marilyn's death as ordered by Sam Giancana wash with you?
No, I don't believe it. I think there were a lot of ways for the Mafia to deal with Marilyn. They had the tapes. They didn't have to kill her.
According to the book Double Cross we had just mentioned, Marilyn was killed using a poison suppository. Do you believe that theory?
I do not.
One of the reasons all these theories and all this confusion can still exist is because there was really a great deal of confusion over the autopsy.
Yes, what started all of this was the fact that when Thomas Noguchi did his autopsy, he discovered that there was nothing in Marilyn's stomach, no residue of any pills. Had she taken 40 Nembutol, which is what we were told, there obviously would have been some residue of pills in her stomach. But experts have said that had she taken the pills over a long period of time, which is consistent with the theory that she accidentally overdosed, there would not have been any residue of pills in her stomach.
But there were also missing stomach contents or missing specimens?
Yes, there were. And this is probably the strongest evidence that the Mafia may have been involved, and that is the fact that when Thomas Noguchi wanted to examine her liver, for instance, to see if the pills had passed further along into her system, the specimens were destroyed within 2 days of her death.
Okay, let's suppose for just a second that the theory of the poison suppository is true. Why would organized crime go to all the trouble to kill Marilyn?
The only possible reason harkens back to what I said in the earlier segment about the fact that there was a gentleman's agreement in that period of time to protect the presidency. But once someone as famous as Marilyn Monroe was dead, all bets would have been off.
Yeah, basically meaning that the Kennedys' affairs with Marilyn would go public. But Robert, as we know, that didn't happen for many years to come.
That's right. Marilyn was dead. The sex scandal of the century. and John and Bobby walked away unscathed. Some say it made the Kennedys act as if they were invincible. It only made their enemies more determined than ever to bring about their downfall. Organized crime and those associated with it began to loathe the Kennedys. Jimmy Hoffa was threatened with jail. Santos Trafficani couldn't get back to Cuba. Carlos Marcello was kidnapped by the feds and dumped in a Guatemalan jungle. And Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana were being stalked by the FBI. They all believed that the trouble stemmed from Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General. They believed that both Kennedys had double-crossed them on this and on Cuba. Throughout the Mafia and throughout the Cuban division of the CIA, there was open resentment.
And so right in that period there, that group of people who were involved in that assassination unit resolved at that point to kill Kennedy and decided they were going to do that.
The Mafia wanted Bobby. Carlos Marcello said, if you cut off the tail, the dog keeps barking. But if you cut off the head, then the dog will die. Robert Kennedy was the tail. John Kennedy was the head. And the day they picked, November 22nd.
If you believe there should be a new investigation into the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, including the death of Marilyn Monroe, call 1-900-400-6341. To vote no, call 1-900-400-6351. Randomly connected callers may ask questions of our panel. Each call is $1, and you must be 18 or older to call. Coming up, evidence linking the murders of John and Robert Kennedy, plus a never-before-seen document written by Jack Ruby. But next, meet the man who personally carried the deadly orders to kill John F. Kennedy.
It's echoed through Dealey Plaza. The Warren Commission told us that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, but they didn't know about a man named Frank Regano. At great personal sacrifice, he's coming forward to talk. You are about to hear the secret behind the Kennedy assassination.
By the summer of 1963, the Kennedys had angered many people in and out of government. But it was the Mafia that had the willingness to commit murder.
Tell him that Jimmy wants this to happen.
That summer, a lawyer for the mob named Frank Regano was asked to carry a message from Jimmy Hoffa to Santos Trafficani in Florida. Trafficani passed the assignment to Carlos Marcello, mob boss of New Orleans. The order was to kill John F. Kennedy. Years later, Trafficani was dying, and his lawyer, Frank Regano, was there.
With us now is that very lawyer, Frank Regano. Frank was my lawyer. Together, we personally sat down with Jimmy Hoffa. And if anyone knows what happened, it's Frank Regano. Frank, thanks so much for coming. Frank.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and privilege. Thank you, Bob.
Frank, who did you represent?
Santo Trafficante, Jimmy Hoffa, and Carlos Marcello. I counseled Carlos Marcello for some 15 years. Represented Santo for 27 years. Was Jimmy Hoffa's personal lawyer for 15 years prior to his death.
How did you feel when Jimmy Hoffa gave you that message?
I did not take him seriously. He said many things off the walls, and I thought that was the most startling remark he'd ever made, and I did not take him seriously, but he was dead serious.
When you met with Marcello and Trafficani in New Orleans, how did they take it?
Much to my surprise and amazement, I really, truly expected, knowing Santo as I did and Carlos as I did, I expected them to break out laughing, but instead they were dead serious, which frightened me. It was scary. I didn't expect them to react in that fashion, and
so you were, in essence, Frank, you were shocked by their response.
Absolutely shocked. I was shocked by their response, but what was really frightening was that they glanced at one another in a manner that gave me the distinct impression that they already had planned such a move. And that was, I felt that I needed to change the subject, which I did immediately. I'm a person who likes to be in control. I didn't like the way matters were going. I didn't like what I saw and what I heard, so I immediately changed the subject.
Frank, I'm going to ask you a question that you don't have to answer. Mr. Regano and I are personal friends, and I appreciate you being here, Frank. What was your reaction when the president was assassinated?
Happy, delighted, very happy because of my clients. The harassment. Bobby Kennedy, as Attorney General, had pursued him unmercifully. He had harassed him, and I thought, well, this will get Bobby off their backs. We knew, and we discussed it, that if something happened to John Kennedy, that Lyndon Johnson hated Bobby almost as much as my clients did, and that he would not keep him on as Attorney General. And we thought that would be the end of Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General. So I was very happy about it.
And Jimmy Hoffa particularly, what was his reaction?
Overwhelmed. He was absolutely overwhelmed about, and he was very happy. He was just almost beside himself with joy.
On Santo Trafficani's deathbed, I believe he shared something with you?
Yes. A few days before he actually died, he and I conversed for some hour and a half, and he was getting a lot of things off of his chest. And among the things he told me was that Carlos had screwed up when in killing Giovanni, referring to John Kennedy, and instead they should have killed Bobby Kennedy. Bobby is what he said.
Joining Frank and me now is Dan Moldea, author of The Hoffa Wars. Dan was the first to present evidence that Jimmy Hoffa and two Mafia bosses arranged and executed the murder of the president.
I just wanted to say that I'm honored to be here with Frank. I think that his information is the most significant breakthrough in this case since the 1963 murder. I think he deserves great respect and doing it at great personal risk. Frank, I'd like to ask you, with all the fervor over Oliver Stone's movie and Jim Garrison as the metaphor and the motif for his movie, what I'm wondering is, I've always believed that Jim Garrison's investigation was a deflection away from Marcello and the organized crime angle in the possible conspiracy against JFK. You knew Jim Garrison. What do you think?
I met Jim Garrison during the Clay Shaw trial and spoke with him at length. I also spoke to Carlos Marcello about Jim Garrison. I got the distinct impression that they were friends, and I think that his tactics were a deflection. I think he was shielding Carlos Marcello.
Excuse me, Dan, it's time to take phone calls. And our first caller is Nicole from Philadelphia. Okay, Nicole?
Yes. The motorcade route was changed to take JFK into a triangulation. How could the Mafia have ordered that? I mean, wouldn't it take some sort of government cooperation?
You know, I believe that the Mafia, and Frank is qualified to answer this, I mean, the Mafia is very sophisticated in its operations, and they've tackled much greater chores than that.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. I hope that answers your question. Okay, and our next caller is Sarah from Houston. Sarah, you're on.
Yes. I wanted to ask Mr. Regano, did you ever feel guilty for being a tool in the murder of the president?
Absolutely. In retrospect, that was a horrible, horrendous mistake on my part. And I've carried a very heavy burden ever since I had that conversation with Santo Trafficani. Absolutely.
Thank you, caller, and I apologize. We're live, and I apologize for calling you Sarah. Now we've got Phil from Indianapolis.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Regano. Why did you wait 29 years to come forward?
Well, it wasn't 29 years, it was 5 years. This conversation I had with Santo Trafficani occurred in March of 1987. Carried that burden for a long period of time, as a matter of fact, until January of this year. And there was a combination of factors. I'm 69 years of age. I have a very serious heart condition. I have 5 children, and my youngest son, Chris, who was Santo's godson, Santo was his godfather, who had baptized Chris, will graduate in this fall. And America and American people, especially this country, have been very good to me. I think that I need to set the record straight. I think that I owe it to this country and to the American people. and I wanted to make this revelation before it was too late. I don't know how much longer I'll be around.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank
Dan,
you very much.
you know, my thanks to you.
My pleasure and privilege, Bob.
Little by little, the truth is coming out. Next, we have proof from Jack Ruby's own hand of his part in the Kennedy conspiracy.
Still to come, a frightening conversation with the wife of one of the assassins, and proof of a witness elimination program designed to permanently silence anyone who speaks up.
We were told Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist with a fascination for guns. That view of him was essential if we were to believe that he acted alone when he killed the president. But if he was a part of a conspiracy, he would have to have been silenced before he could talk. On November 22nd, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for assassinating the president. For 2 days, he was paraded through police headquarters, yet he continued to claim his innocence.
Deny these charges.
But before Oswald got a chance to tell his side of the story, he was ordered transferred. In the most secure area of police headquarters, he was gunned down. We were told the killer was a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. We were told Ruby did it to spare Jackie Kennedy the grief of a trial. And we were told Ruby didn't know Oswald prior to that fateful shooting. But Ruby did know Oswald. They were seen together at the Carousel Club, a club that Ruby owned in Dallas.
When I saw the news and realized that Jack Ruby had gone into the basement of the police station and shot this man, I knew immediately who it was. I had sat down and had a drink with him 2 weeks prior to.
Their main concern on the 23rd was that Oswald was still alive, and he couldn't be trusted by the mob, so they had to do something about that. And that's when Jack Ruby was told to silence him.
Despite what we were told, Ruby knew Oswald, but Ruby never told his side of the story. Or did he? As Ruby was dying, he managed to write a final letter, a final statement. No one knew he had done it, and he secretly managed to hand it to one of his prison guards.
With us now is Larry Howard, director of the JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas, and the very guard that Ruby handed that letter to, Al Maddox. And Al, let me begin by asking you, how well did you know Jack Ruby in prison?
I had known him about a year before he got into trouble, maybe a little longer.
And you were also the jailer who booked him in, right?
Yes, I booked Jack Ruby for murder when he come into Dallas County Jail.
So when he was ill with pneumonia, you were one of the jailers who was transferring him over to the prison hospital. Is that when he slipped you the note?
Yes, it was.
Did he realize at that point in time how sick he was?
No, he did not. He did not realize it because he wasn't excited. This would have excited him.
So when Jack slipped you the note, did you read it right away? Did you hang on to it?
No, I didn't. I put it in my pocket for several hours. Then when I was cleaning my pockets out, I found the note and I almost threw it away.
So you thought nothing of it?
Thought nothing of it.
When you read it, did you believe it?
Well, I gave it a lot of thought. And yes, I kind of believed it, but they already had all this information. I was almost sure that this information was already collected by detectives.
So when you didn't think anything of it, why did you hang on to it for all these years?
Well, one of my English teachers from about the 7th grade called me in Dallas and she said, Al, she said, anything that you can gather up from any of these people, she said, keep it because you're brushing elbows with history. She's a very intelligent person.
And Larry, when Al first brought you this note, which I guess was about 6-8 weeks ago, what did you think?
Well, we have a lot of people come to the center to give us information. That's why we're there. But when Al came in with a note that he had kept secret for 25 years, and it was handwritten by Jack Ruby, basically the confession why he killed Lee Harvey Oswald, to say the least, I was excited.
Yes, he's excited. His eyes got this big, and he didn't jump that high.
Got a little astounded, maybe, might be a good word.
I think he looked at it with a little apprehension. He wasn't real sure that that's what it was.
Well, and we have done the same thing, so our next step, obviously, is to verify this note, and we want to go over to our handwriting expert. After you've hung on to this note for so many years, we are having it verified by Ann Silver Conway, and she's with Robert right now. Robert.
And you've examined the letter, comparing it to other examples of handwriting. What did you look for?
Well, I look at the slant, the shape of the letter connections, and the letters themselves.
among other things, in question document examination.
So, what do you think?
Well, I believe that the handwriting is authentic Jack Ruby handwriting.
Well, we're all sitting on the edge of our seats. Al, would you please read the letter?
Yes, sir. You've known me a long time, Jack said, and you've known how I've struggled to make my clubs go. Also, Lynn has known me up to this time and that I've gotten into trouble. Johnny Crank, myself, and Lynn have been out to dinner many times, and I'm sure they know the kind of person I am. Well, this all adds up to what I'm going to tell you. That I'm being framed for the assassination, that my motive was to silence Oswald. I know you think I'm crazy, but keep this note for a later date, and you will then know what I'm saying here. Keep your eyes open, and maybe you will notice some things. And I have.
That's amazing stuff. May I just see that for a moment? Just to reiterate, he says, I'm being framed for the assassination, that my motive was to silence Oswald. I know you will think I'm crazy, but keep this note for a later date, and you will then know what I'm saying here in Jack Ruby's own hands. Amazing stuff. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll be right back in just a few moments. Stay tuned.
Next, startling new evidence in the Robert Kennedy assassination. Evidence of a second gunman. And Sirhan's connection to the Mafia. And later in the program, the truth about the man behind the picket fence. And a frightening conversation with a woman who was married to one of the assassins. All this and more when we return on the Kennedy assassinations. Coincidence or conspiracy?
A recent poll indicates that 73% of Americans believe John Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy. But what of his brother? For over 24 years, this scene has been etched in our minds. Robert Kennedy gunned down by Sirhan just moments after winning the California primary. As we ask the question, were the two Kennedy assassinations related? We have uncovered explosive evidence that Sirhan could not have acted alone.
It was 1968. For 5 years, Robert Kennedy had mourned the loss of his brother. But now, as a United States Senator, he was on the road to becoming president.
With the administration in connection with Vietnam.
He had an ability to communicate with people, people trusted, and then he became a real source of hope for this country.
We are a great country, and a selfish country, and a compassionate country, and I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of time.
Bobby Kennedy could be sensitized to differences between people, and I believe that that sensitivity would have led to a different America.
But it was not to be. On the night of June 5th, 1968, Robert Kennedy won the California primary.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Just moments after this speech, he walked through the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel.
My thought at that point was, we really have a president. This is the guy that understands and who's trusted. And then it all broke loose. I saw Sirhan with a gun in his hand, saying, "Kennedy, you no good son of a bitch." Saw the gun raised and fired.
This is what was supposed to have happened that night. Actors help us recreate events, portraying Bobby Kennedy, Sirhan, Maitre d' Carl Euchre, and others at the Ambassador Hotel. As Senator Kennedy came through the kitchen shaking hands and celebrating his victory, someone pushed forward and began firing. Kennedy and 5 others were struck by bullets. Kennedy died. The man with the gun was identified as Sirhan, an unemployed stable hand of Palestinian descent. We were told it was one gun, one gunman, and the case was closed. But was it?
I don't think it's possible for the angle that I remember Sirhan holding the gun for him to have shot the senator in the back of the head, because I never saw him turn around.
I was standing behind Robert Kennedy, 3, 4, 5 feet. They said the gun had to be point blank range, even contact. Every witness put Sirhan and Kennedy face to face.
shot was fired at a distance of 1 to 1.5 inches away from the senator's ear. There's no way in the world that the muzzle of Sirhan's gun was ever 1 to 1.5 inches away from the senator's right ear. No way in the world.
Both the autopsy and independent Los Angeles Police Department tests clearly indicate that those bullets were fired from a distance of about 1 to 3 inches, which all but eliminates Sirhan as the person who has shot Bob.
Witnesses and experts say Sirhan was not close enough to fire the fatal shot. Joining us now is a man who is right on top of the action and perhaps knows more about the truth than anyone else. Jennifer?
Thanks, Robert. Carl Euchre was the German maitre d' of the Ambassador Hotel back in 1968. He was on the podium when Senator Kennedy made his victory speech, and he led Senator Kennedy through the pantry. And he was the man who wrestled with Sirhan on the steam table. I would like to introduce to you now Mr. Carl Euchre today. And Mr. Euchre, first of all, I want to thank you for coming all the way from Dusseldorf, Germany to be with us tonight. And I also want to introduce Dr. Philip Melanson, who is the director of the RFK Assassination Archives. Carl, I know this is still very difficult for you to talk about, but can you tell me, how was it that you were the first to grab Sirhan?
Yeah, I was close to Mr. Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy. I had to take him to the press room.
Right.
He was supposed to go first downstairs to the next ballroom.
Right. But Sirhan...
But that has been changed in the last second, and we had to go to the ballroom.
The route was changed because of the senator's people. Now let me ask you, where was Sirhan with reference to you? Where was he standing?
He was behind me.
You heard the shot?
He came to me. I didn't hear the shot. He came, he was trying to get between myself and the steam table to get close enough to Kennedy, to shoot Kennedy.
Right.
But I didn't let him go. I didn't know who it was. And then I heard the shot, and I grabbed the gun away after the first shot already. Maybe he shot twice. And then I put the gun on top of the steam table, and I grabbed his head in my right, in a head, how do you call it?
In a headlock,
yes. In a headlock on the steam table, and pushed the gun away, far away.
Now, is it true that after you had pushed the gun away, you felt a shot go across the top of your head?
No. Couldn't have happened. But there was a shot behind me, on top, right over my shoulders.
Okay. So a shot did go over your head?
Did go over my, yes,
That
but not
shot.
from Sirhan.
But not from Sirhan. You're saying
No.
he did not fire that shot?
No, he couldn't have shot it again.
And Philip, Mr. Euchre was basically the star witness for the prosecution at the point,
Absolutely.
wasn't he?
He was described in the police's own documents as the prosecution's star witness. And yet his consistent account that he's told you here tonight has elements that are devastating for the official version. He moved Sirhan's gun away after the second shot, and Robert Kennedy was hit by 4 shots. He physically blocked Sirhan, as he's described, from getting close enough to inflict point-blank range, and he heard bullets from a different direction. So their star witness is one of the most critical against the official version.
As a matter of fact, it is so against the official version that the LA Police Department did 2 different reenactments, 2 different versions of the reenactments, one that Carl participated in and one that he did not. And we have those tapes right now. We have some of the footage, and let's go over to you, Robert, and take a look at them.
Indeed, the Los Angeles Police Department did want to see for themselves, so they set up a video camera to recreate those fatal minutes.
Carl Euchre acted as technical consultant and the police followed what he and the other witnesses all said had happened. As you can see, the police officer posing as Sirhan could not get close enough, but Kennedy was shot at point-blank range, and the police knew that from the medical report, so Carl Euchre was thanked and sent home. This show obtained a second LAPD reenactment. Despite the facts, they repositioned both the senator and Sirhan, and it was this tape that was shown to the jury in Sirhan's trial. Why?
Well, Carl, I would just like to ask you one more time. The official version of the LA police report said that Senator Kennedy was shot from behind the right ear with the gun 1 to 2 inches or so away from the back of his head. Is that possible as you recall the events?
No, was not possible.
It was not possible. Okay, I want to thank you, sir, for traveling this great distance to be with us and help set the record straight.
If you believe there should be a new investigation into the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, including the death of Marilyn Monroe, call 1-900-400-6341. To vote no, call 1-900-400-6351. Randomly connected callers may ask questions of our panel. Each call is $1, and you must be 18 or older to call. Coming up, more shocking proof in the Robert Kennedy assassination, plus attempts to threaten witnesses not to tell the truth. And was Sirhan programmed to kill Kennedy as part of the conspiracy?
Following the shooting of Senator Kennedy, Los Angeles police are quoted as saying, "We don't want another Dallas," in obvious reference to the assassination of John Kennedy. But whether they wanted it or not, the fact is Sirhan's gun held only 8 bullets. But experts claim more than 8 shots were fired that night in the pantry.
Get an ambulance! Get an ambulance!
3 shots lodged in Kennedy, 5 shots lodged in bystanders. That's all 8 bullets. So what then accounts for 2 more bullets found by FBI agent William Bailey?
Prior to interviewing the witnesses, I walked around the pantry room where Bobby was shot. I observed 2 bullet holes in a center divider at the rear portion of the pantry. It was an area that Bobby had just walked through, and there were 2 bullet holes in a wood center divider at the rear portion of that pantry room.
10 bullets, 2 more than Sirhan fired.
All of Sirhan's bullets are accounted for. So any evidence of bullet holes in the wood in that pantry guarantees there was a second gun firing.
Then there were more bullets found in the ceiling tiles.
The senator was shot 4 times. Then you've got 5 bystanders who were wounded, and those bullets were recovered. So you've got 9 there. Then you had 3 shots in ceiling tiles.
14 bullets. Remember, Sirhan's gun only held 8. The LAPD says that bullets were bouncing off ceiling tiles, changing directions, and that's how they account for all this. But is that likely?
Bullets move in straight lines, and all the power and might of the federal government and all the nonsense of the Warren Commission and of the LAPD and the JFK and RFK cases, respectively, cannot alter that. They have fooled around with physics enough.
Remember, Sirhan was not close enough. He was to the front and not behind. His gun didn't hold enough bullets. He wasn't firing upwards at the correct angle. All evidence of a second gunman. But there's more, like the pictures taken by a would-be photojournalist at the time named Scott Inyard.
After I saw Robert Kennedy fall, a number of other people in front of me were also injured. I jumped up on a table pretty much to get out of the way. And I kept taking pictures. I took a total of about 20 pictures in the pantry. Everything from behind Robert Kennedy during the shooting. And that's what you would have seen on these photographs. Everything that took place from behind. Anyone who had moved in, you could have seen what the security guard had done. You would have seen the position of everyone that everyone's been arguing about today.
But the police confiscated Scott's film, and the crucial photos of the actual assassination were destroyed.
According to the California State Archives, the LAPD burned 2,400 crime scene pictures in a hospital incinerator. Scott's photos were among these. They were destroyed just 3 weeks before Sirhan's trial. Jennifer?
Thanks, Robert. Joining us again now is Dan Moldea and Dr. Philip Melanson. Phil, let's get right to it. What reason was given for destroying those photos?
They claim that they were duplicates and of no evidentiary value, but a memo in their own files required them to save all photos and catalog them, even those that weren't going to be introduced at the trial. So that's a false claim.
Okay, I must mention to our audience that we did ask members of the LAPD to come on our show or to send a representative. They declined. Now that said, Dan, you personally interviewed a number of LAPD officers, some sheriff's deputies, officials that were at the scene.
Over 100.
What did they tell you?
Well, basically, we had concluded that the LAPD had misrepresented key facts in the case, that they had destroyed material evidence, that they had obstructed independent attempts to review the critical issues in the case. What I did is I went to the police, said, what did you see that night? What did you do? And basically, their information corroborated an FBI report which indicated that there were additional bullets found at the scene itself. Bullets, bullet holes, and bullet damage, and none of this was appeared in the property reports or the analyzed evidence reports of the LAPD in its final report.
So you actually discovered eyewitnesses to more than 8 bullet holes, not just bullet holes, but bullets.
Not just civilian eyewitnesses. I'm talking about police officers and police officials who were involved in the investigation.
Okay, what about the door frame and the ceiling tiles? What happened to those?
They were ultimately destroyed, and the police claim they were destroyed because they were of no evidentiary value, but Sirhan's case was still on appeal during that time. And if this was the proof that second bullets weren't fired, they should have kept that proof forever to avoid another Dallas. Suspiciously also, they lost or destroyed all the test results of the probing of that wood and ceiling tiles to see if bullets were there.
Okay, it's not inconceivable, though, is it, that someone would destroy evidence after using it in a trial originally?
It should be inconceivable in this case because the political pressure was so enormous, and they should have kept this proof to be able to tell the American people that a second gun wasn't fired. It's very highly suspicious that they would destroy both the tests and the physical evidence.
Okay, once again, Dan, you have talked to people who actually saw more than 8 bullets. There was a security guard there. He was armed. What's to have prevented him from having fired his gun?
I've spent a lot of time with the security guard, and I've interviewed him at length, and he continues to insist that he is willing to cooperate with any official investigation of the case, re-investigation of the case, which I think Dr. Melanson's book has provided adequate justification for.
Was his gun ever tested?
No. No guns in the pantry were tested that night except for Sirhan's. So there are a lot of questions with regard to this matter that need to be settled in a competent investigation.
Let me ask you a question. You know, we had 3 witnesses on this show who were witnesses to the scene at the time. They told us they were uncomfortable and basically afraid to come on this show. With all the people you interviewed, did you run into that at all?
Yes, I ran into that for a couple of reasons. One is the mysterious deaths of witnesses in the JFK case made people nervous. The second factor here, though, is that witnesses who saw things counter to the official version or that were conspiratorial were mishandled by the LAPDs and in some cases abused. They were browbeaten, they were pressured to change their story, and many of them were young and did not have representation, so they had a terrible experience that they wanted to walk away from if they could.
With regard to the LAPD officers I interviewed, I found them to be very cooperative, and I think there's an abundance of information within the LAPD which is not being considered right now.
It just hadn't come out. Phil, I want to ask you one other question about the woman in the polka dot dress. This is so intriguing to me. Tell me real quick the story.
There was a mystery woman in a polka dot dress that was seen with Sirhan. The police said she didn't exist and there were only a couple of witnesses and they were wrong. But in the files and in my own interviews, we've turned up 18 witnesses who saw this woman with Sirhan before the shooting, at the shooting scene, and running out of the hotel afterwards with another man. So I'm sure she exists, but LAPD did not find her.
And there was actually an APB out on her and then it was canceled?
Yes, it was canceled prematurely against the wishes of the issuing officer because they were shutting down the investigation to a one-gun theory.
Okay, I want to get to some of our phone calls. We have a caller on the line right now. I believe it's Pat from Boston. Pat, are you there? Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, please.
I had heard that Sirhan worked at a racetrack. Is it true that he had ties?
I'm sorry, is it true that he what? I'm sorry, are you putting your phone down, caller? We're having a little difficulty hearing you here. Okay, let's go to the next caller. Scott, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Melanson, you've mentioned the security guard. Could he have been part of the conspiracy?
I don't have proof that he was part of the conspiracy, but I think the Los Angeles Police Department's investigation did not appropriately look at that dimension. There were witnesses who saw other guns in the room, I should point out, besides the security guard, so it's not just a single option.
And again, I've interviewed the security guard at length. He's never refused to answer a question. He's never gone off the record. But again, he agrees to cooperate with a responsible official investigation.
So maybe somebody should get in there and talk to him. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both very much, and we're going to be talking to you a little bit later on toward the end of the show. Right now, we're going to go to a commercial, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Next, was Sirhan under mind control when he fired at Senator Kennedy? They are called Manchurian.
WNUV TV.
Ever since shots were fired in the Ambassador Hotel, there have been questions. Could Sirhan have been a Manchurian candidate, sent into the hotel pantry to do someone else's bidding?
The essence of the Manchurian candidate theory or approach is that Sirhan was programmed, brainwashed, if you will, into committing this particular act.
Somebody who is highly hypnotized, once they're programmed, they can respond instantly to any prearranged signal.
Dr. Herbert Spiegel examined the work of defense psychiatrist Dr. Bernard Diamond, who put Sirhan under hypnosis. The results were astounding.
He had hypnotized Sirhan, and in the course of doing it, had him acting like a monkey, so he pounced around like a monkey. Now that's like an old vaudeville trick that is done, but usually only people who are highly hypnotizable are able to do that.
The notion of mind control first appeared in this case with Sirhan's diary. Some experts say that the writing could have been the work of someone under hypnosis. Then there was Sirhan's lack of memory about the actual killing. Immediately after his arrest, Sirhan could not remember anything.
It was Sirhan who was telling the truth, and I'll face any man and tell him what happened, son, and look him in the eyes, because that is the truth, as far as I know it and remember it. I don't even know that the man is dead. To me, my whole life stopped on June 5. Reality to me stopped right then, I guess. All the time from then, for over the past year, from June 5 of 68 on, is unreal to me, sir. I still don't believe.
I believe he was easily programmable, and I believe that the conduct as described at the trial is consistent with somebody who was in a trance state when it happened.
But who could have programmed Sirhan to kill Kennedy? At San Quentin, prison psychologist Dr. Edward Simpson hoped to find that out once he deprogrammed Sirhan. But Simpson was dismissed, allegedly because of his interest in Sirhan.
He was told that to keep away from Sirhan. And in a very short time after that, he was dismissed as the prison psychologist.
Part of a cover-up? Jennifer?
Thanks, Robert. Joining Dr. Melanson and myself is Robert Kaiser. He's a former Time magazine correspondent who worked his way onto the Sirhan defense team in order to get the whole story, and he is also the author of the book RFK Must Die. Welcome to you, gentlemen. And first of all, Bob, I'd like to ask you, for all the 12 bullet theories, you do believe that Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy, but you don't believe he did it of his own free will.
That's right. I think that the secret is still locked in the mind of Sirhan. I believe that he was programmed to kill Robert Kennedy, programmed through hypnosis, and programmed to forget that he'd been programmed. And there is some evidence of that.
Why do you believe he was so susceptible to hypnosis? Why do you believe this theory?
He practiced. He played with hypnosis himself by his own admission. It was kind of a surprise to Dr. Diamond when he first came into the cell to meet Sirhan for the first time. I was with him, and he wasn't too sure that he could even hypnotize Sirhan. The idea, he would hypnotize him so Sirhan might be able to remember more of what he could not remember in a waking state. So let's give it a try, and he holds up a quarter, and in 3 seconds Sirhan is deeply under.
Wasn't there a story where he asked him to sing an Arab song?
Later on, Dr. Diamond was able to show off a little bit for the defense attorneys, and he would give Sirhan some programmed instructions under hypnosis, bring him out of hypnosis, give him a signal, like blowing his nose with a handkerchief, and Sirhan at one time sang an Arab song. Another time climbed the bars of his cell like a monkey, and Dr. Diamond said, "Hey, Sirhan, what are you doing up there?" "Oh, I'm just getting a little exercise," he said. Of course, that was a plausible explanation, but it wasn't the true one. The true one was that he'd been programmed by Dr. Diamond.
awfully wild stuff. Phil, this is the most bizarre, far-fetched, and yet compelling thing in this whole thing. This whole idea of a Manchurian candidate, named, of course, for the movie. In your research, is it possible?
It's very possible. The experts who worked for our government in this program told each other it was possible and tried to operationalize it. We spent millions of dollars operationalizing this in a race with the Russians to get the robot assassin.
But this isn't really widely accepted, is it? I mean, does your average psychologist, psychiatrist on the street believe you can program a person to kill?
No, they don't believe that, and the doctors who were recruited into this program were a strange group of doctors and researchers, but they believed it, and they knew that it could be done, and they practiced it. They held demonstrations where they were able to take people who were afraid of violence and program them to simulate a murder.
Okay, Phil, you first. Who would be capable? Who would have the knowledge to pull something like this off?
Unfortunately, a lot of people. The program of mind control in our government involved hundreds of researchers, dozens of clinics, some university settings, and it wasn't well monitored. It was very out of control. So I can't say whether there were 1,000 or 400 people who had this technology, but it was far beyond 5 or 7 people.
In your book, there seems to be a fairly strong case for CIA involvement because the CIA was doing these experiments. Do you believe that?
The CIA was doing these experiments, but their experiments were very much out of control, and it's not unthinkable that somebody else could have appropriated their technology in an assassination plot.
Bob, who do you think did this?
Well, you know, I spent practically 6 months with Sirhan almost every day, and I kept trying to develop leads. The FBI was not allowed to talk to Sirhan, and of course I was. And after the case was over and Sirhan was in jail and sentenced and everything, I went to J. Edgar Hoover, sent him a long letter saying that I had these and these and these leads, some of which led to Mafia-type connections. There was one connection in the country of Colombia in Latin America that possibly might have led to Carlos, the international terrorist. I was a lone reporter in a leaky rowboat. I thought that the FBI would be interested in the truth, but J. Edgar Hoover said, thanks a lot, but no thanks.
Well, I can't let you go without asking you, Bob, why wasn't this information brought out at the trial? You were on the defense team.
All right, you just talked to Phil about the bizarreness of this theory. The lawyers made a simple prudential judgment. Can we sell this to the jury? We don't think we can, and they just didn't bother to bring it up.
One final question. Do you gentlemen believe that Sirhan could be deprogrammed today?
I believe he could be. It would not be easy, but if he would give us permission, the experts say it can be done under the right circumstances.
It has been done in the past with similar programmed killers.
But as yet, he's not given his permission. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Robert?
With each passing day, as more evidence comes out, it is harder and harder to believe that either Sirhan or Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. In both cases, the truth was covered up. Why? When we return, you'll find out who gave the orders and who carried them out.
Next, the shocking truth behind the Kennedy assassinations and how the secret has been kept so long. And coming up, proof from one of the assassin's own hand revealing his orders to kill.
It's nation and cover-up. And who suffered? America. Wouldn't you like to know who was behind JFK's assassination? Wouldn't you like to find out about a man who claims to be one of the assassins?
Roscoe White. Like Oswald, he'd been in the Marines. Like Oswald, he'd been recruited for secret intelligence work. And like Oswald, he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. Roscoe White came to Dallas just 2 months prior to the assassination as a member of the Dallas police force. His wife, Geneva White, worked for Jack Ruby at the Carousel Club, and he had orders to carry out a top-secret assignment. His assignment was to assassinate the president. Roscoe White was the gunman behind the picket fence.
Several experts are convinced that Roscoe White was one of the assassins. Joining us again is Larry Howard. Larry, what'd you bring us?
In the spring of 1990, Ricky Don White came through our doors at the center in Dallas, Texas, wanting us to prove his father did not kill John Kennedy. During the investigation, in June of 1990, Ricky Don White found a metal container in Paris, Texas. In this container was a witness elimination book where Roscoe White participated in the killing of 28 innocent people after the assassination.
Larry, 24 hours ago, Roscoe White's sister called us and said that this is all bunk.
I talked to Linda just before I left to come to L.A. There are a couple of Kennedy research buffs in Dallas who are furnished her 5% of the information on this case. We have 95% of the information on the case at our center in Dallas.
Why have you brought this book on?
I brought 5 pages of the book. On these 5 pages are 5 pictures of people we can't identify. Hopefully tonight, the American people looking at this show will be able to help us with the identification.
A possible witness elimination book, 28 pages of names and codes. But Roscoe White never lived to answer questions about it.
But just as Sam Giancana had been silenced, and Johnny Roselli had been silenced, and Jimmy Hoffa had been silenced, Roscoe White had to be silenced too. And on September 23rd, 1971, while firing up an acetylene torch, he was killed. But the truth didn't die with him, because Roscoe White left behind some evidence of his part in the conspiracy.
Joining us now is Baptist minister Jack Shaw. Jack was at Roscoe White's deathbed. And Jack, I understand Roscoe actually lived for about 48 hours after his accident, and you were able to talk to him. What did he tell you?
We talked about several things, but at the beginning of the conversation, he talked about what happened. We discussed that, and he said that he had gone on a break, and he came back off the break, and there was under the bench, there was a can that he was in a hurry to get home that day, and he fired up the welding torch, and the explosion happened. And he also said that he saw someone leaving the scene in a hurry when he was coming back in from the break.
So the point was, he indicated to you that he believed that this was not an accident.
Yes, he indicated that to me, yes.
Okay, now I know that you also made some 40 or 50 hours of audio tape with Roscoe's wife, Geneva. What did she tell you in your hours of interviews?
Well, we talked about a lot of things, but she talked about overhearing her husband and Jack Ruby talking, and about the assassination, things like that, and we talked about many events that transpired after the assassination.
Now, Jack, I understand that Geneva told you that she had a conversation with her husband where Roscoe told her why he was going to assassinate President Kennedy, that he was going to do it, and why.
Yes, she did. She said that Roscoe told her that Kennedy has been a pretty good president, but he has to die. He didn't carry out his own orders, and if I don't carry out my orders, I'll have to die too.
This is pretty amazing stuff. Do you believe her?
I've said all along that I've been placed in a unique position, and I don't know exactly why I've been placed here, but I'm hoping that someone will come forth with evidence that will confirm what I've been told. That's what I'm hoping for, and that's what I'm praying for. And until that happens, I have to remain open about this.
I see, and once again, this is based on your interview with Roscoe White's wife, who has since passed away. Jack Shaw, thank you very much for being with us and sharing that information with us today. Robert?
If Roscoe White committed this act, then he had to be part of a conspiracy, part of a team. Meet a woman who claims her husband was also in Dallas that day and was an assassin. We've disguised her identity for her own safety. She's convinced she would be killed if certain people knew she spoke to us.
He told me that whoever killed JFK killed Marilyn Monroe too. He said everybody's going to really be surprised to find out that they were all rolled up into one person, all those murders. He said that he was a member of a group called S-Force, which I had never heard of, and nobody I talked to back then knew what it was. And he said this group knew everything about the Kennedy assassination, and that they knew that the photos were doctored and that the autopsy was doctored. And he said that Oswald was a dupe, that he never killed Kennedy, and that Jack Ruby was also a dupe, and that it was all set up to get rid of Oswald. He wouldn't say who ordered him. He just said that they were put in this group specifically to assassinate people. Well, he said the CIA was responsible for the Kennedy assassination. I want the people that killed President Kennedy, killed my president, to pay for what they did. Nobody has a right to take somebody else's life. And he was our president. You know, whether he was morally right or wrong in some of the things he did, he was our president.
When we come back, you'll find out what our experts really think and find out if it was a coincidence or a conspiracy. One of the things that makes investigating the Kennedy assassination so difficult is the cover-up. Evidence was destroyed, and some experts believe that nearly 200 people were killed to keep the secret. Who has the power to provoke such fear? Who can give orders to kill a president, a senator, a movie star, or a witness?
Both John and Robert Kennedy represented a danger to the establishment and to the status quo. They were making deals with the Soviets and threatening the power of the CIA.
The changes that John Kennedy would have effected in his second term, not just in Vietnam, but all across the board, cutting back the Cold War, détente with Khrushchev, détente with Castro, all of which he was moving in that direction with, would have altered the shape and the destiny of this country. And the concept of Robert Kennedy coming up behind him and the other brother was terrifying to people in power.
If something happens that they don't like Kennedy saying he wants to get out of Vietnam or recognize Cuba, then the deep political arrangements can kick in order to get rid of a president and his brother who were creating problems for people in power.
Did the mob get permission to kill the Kennedys? According to Sam Giancana, they did. He goes on to say that the CIA helped them to cover it up.
To this day, I'll believe it with all my heart and my soul. The same people that killed John Kennedy killed Robert Kennedy, and they killed Martin Luther King. There was a conspiracy in all three, and it was motivated for the same reasons, that all three men were a danger to the establishment.
We have to think of the Kennedy assassination or even the CIA Mafia plots against Castro not as single events, but as part of an ongoing process that it's normal for the CIA to turn to criminals.
Perhaps that would explain why Sam Giancana himself was killed. Sam had been subpoenaed to testify in the House probe into the JFK assassination, but he was shot just after the subpoena arrived.
Oh, we ain't gonna talk. Hey, would you like some sausage?
Once behind the head and 7 times around the mouth was a sign to keep quiet. Then Johnny Roselli was subpoenaed. Roselli was the man the CIA went to set up the assassination unit. Before he could get to Washington, he was stuffed in a 55-gallon drum, his foot in his mouth. And then Jimmy Hoffa was abducted, never seen or heard from again.
My father, James R. Hoffa, has been missing for some 32 hours. He left for an appointment at Macus's Red Fox restaurant at approximately 1:30 p.m. Wednesday, July 30, 1975.
Evidence indicates that all 3 were involved in the Kennedy conspiracies, and all 3 were silenced. The mob might have wanted to believe that they were in charge, but someone else, someone more powerful, was cleaning up.
We've assembled our panel to make sense of this mystery. Gentlemen, let's get down to it. You all seem to think that John Kennedy was killed in a conspiracy, all right? Who was behind it?
Bob, I'm an organized crime investigator, and organized crime by definition is conspiracy crime, it's enterprise crime, it's crime by association. I believe that Carlos Marcello, Santos Trafficani, and Jimmy Hoffa arranged and executed the murder of the president in 1963. And I think that the key is getting Frank Regano immunized so that he could tell the entire story of what he knows of what happened just prior to that murder.
Well, I think it was a grand conspiracy that went beyond the Mafia and included CIA renegades, some right-wing types, and some pro-Castro types.
Mm-hmm. And Phil?
I tend to agree with that. I see a network of CIA case officers, anti-Castro Cubans with some help from their friends in the mob.
Mm-hmm. Frank?
Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficani, Jimmy Hoffa, and possibly assistance from the Cuban exiles in Miami that were beholden to Santo.
All right, so you all seem to agree that John F. Kennedy was assassinated at least by organized crime, possibly with some CIA help and some additional help. What I want to know is why doesn't Bobby go after him at this point, if that's true? I mean, he is Attorney General. He has the power.
He didn't have the power any longer, even though he was still Attorney General. He was in a lame duck position.
When the announcement of John Kennedy's death occurred, Jimmy Hoffa said, Bobby Kennedy is just another lawyer now. And what Victor says is exactly right. Bobby Kennedy had lost his power, and he was regaining that power in 1968.
Frank?
Bobby went through a terrible ordeal after the assassination of his brother. He felt responsible because of his actions in pursuing the Mafia figures and all, and I think he was guilt-ridden, and there was a period of about a year and a half where he remained inactive.
Okay, Bobby, he was a lame duck. Then why did the Warren Commission cover up?
They were trying to protect the system, and they, in their own minds, they thought they were protecting the people from a disaster that was even worse than the president's assassination.
They were also lied to, and information was withheld by the very agencies they depended on, like the FBI and the CIA.
And I think the reason for this institutional cover-up was because of the government's long-term association with the underworlds, perhaps the same underworld figures who were involved in the murder of the president.
Okay, let me go right down the line real quickly once more. 5 years later, Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. Do you think the same people are responsible, Dan?
I don't know. I think it's the only way it's going to come out is if the Justice Department does as the House Select Committee on Assassination suggested, reinvestigate the case, and I think there has to be an independent investigation of the RFK case.
Victor?
I think the Mafia was probably involved in Bobby's assassination.
I think they're both unsolved conspiracies, and law enforcement covered things up, and it needs to be reinvestigated.
Frank?
Not at all. I don't think the Mafia had anything to do with Bobby Kennedy's assassination. They were very practical, pragmatic. They're very realistic. He was no longer Attorney General. He was no longer a threat to them.
Okay, and you had the final word. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us.
The consensus is that the mob killed John F. Kennedy and could have been behind Bobby's death. But could the mob alone have done it? The motorcade route was changed. The Army was told to stand down and not provide additional security in Dallas. And there was a massive government cover-up. When we come back, you will learn what our viewers think.
If you believe there should be a new investigation into the deaths of both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy, including the death of Marilyn Monroe, call 1-900-400-6341. To vote no, call 1-900-400-6351. Randomly connected callers may ask questions of our panel. Each call is $1, and you must be 18 or older to call.
Sponsored. All through the show, we asked the question, were the Kennedys murdered in a conspiracy? Now we add the question, were all these deaths from Marilyn Monroe to Jimmy Hoffa to the others linked? That is for you to decide.
We began this show, I guess it was nearly 2 hours ago, and the response to our telephone questions has really been overwhelming. Should there be a new investigation into the deaths of John and Robert Kennedy?
98% said yes. 98% are now saying they are tired of the cover-up and they want answers.
That is really an incredible percentage of our callers. Now, before we say goodbye tonight, we have one more phone number that we want to tell you about. This is how you can personally get involved in reopening the RFK investigation.
The Inquiry and Accountability Foundation will be filing a request with the Los Angeles County Grand Jury to reopen its investigation into the death of Robert Kennedy. To lend your support, call 1-900-288-5535, and we will forward your information to the IAF to be included in the submission. $1 per minute. The average call is 2 minutes. You must be 18 or older to call.
Jennifer and I would like to thank our guests, and I would like to thank all the people who spoke on this program. In order for a democracy to effectively work, we must all be allowed to participate. That requires a full release of information to solve these national mysteries. We can only hope. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
And if you would like to learn more about the Kennedys or about the Kennedy assassinations, you might want to check out the following at a bookstore or a library.
Coming up, Hunter and McCall launch an intense investigation into the murdered movie star's life in order to trap her killer. Hunter, next on WNUV TV 54.
7878. That's 1-800-858-7878. Each tape is $19.95 plus shipping and handling.
Accommodations provided by the Century Plaza Hotel and Tower, offering the finest in luxury service in Southern California style on LA's fashionable West Side. The Century Plaza Hotel and Tower.
Transportation provided by Dollar Rent-A-Car with over 1,000 locations worldwide. Dollar Rent-A-Car.